They told us comets are orphans, wandering stones adopted by no one. But look at 3i Atlas and try to say that with a straight face. It doesn't drift like a stranger. It moves like something with a memory. Not a trespasser, a descendant. Imagine a time before our calendars had names, when the sun shed a luminous shard of itself during a convulsion so violent it left scars in the solar wind. That shard cooled as it fled, skin of glass over a core still humming, curling into a black embryo that learned the long cold grammar of interstellar space. That is the story the instruments whisper when you strip away the noise. Atlas was born from the sun, a star child carrying a trace of the parent's fire. The first hints were easy to dismiss. Amateur spectroscopes caught narrow lines that shouldn't have survived in a dusty coma. A peculiar ratio of ionized calcium, a stubborn helium signature that flared and faded with a rhythm not seen in ordinary comets. Sunlight reflected oddly, said the careful people. But Dr. Mara Perrin, a heliophysicist who has spent a decade reading the sun like a pulse, and noticed something uglier. When Atlas brightened, the solar wind downstream of it flexed, a soft dent as if the object had its own tiny magnetized breath. "It's a child that still smells like home," she muttered in an interview that never aired, because the station thought it sounded insane. If you've ever watched a newborn reach blindly for the warmth that fed it, you already know more about orbital mechanics than you think. Atlas's path is not a clean fling around the star. It is a hesitating arc, punctuated by minute corrections, like a migrating animal feeling the planet's curves with its bones. The simulations that track its dust don't simply map a trail. They sketch an umbilicus, a faint chord of particles responding to solar tides as though to a heartbeat. Engineers hate that metaphor. Data doesn't have feelings. But even they can't explain why the object's jets don't behave like chaotic geysers. They strobe, then rest, then strobe again, timing themselves to the sun's own oscillations as if listening for a cue. Listen closely to the radio hiss, and the romance becomes numbers. A cluster of receivers in the Atacama logged a repeating envelope around 160 megahertz. A slow undulation that rose when the sun spat a minor flare and fell when it calmed. The lag between flare and undulation wasn't random. It matched a transit time as if Atlas were absorbing pressure from the solar wind and answering with its own breath. Reflex, said Dr. Kaito Ishimura of the Imaginary Lumen Array, slipping through plots that looked like an EKG for a rock. Reflex is a word for bodies, not boulders. He used it on purpose. There is an uglier explanation, of course. Machine, probe, parasitic engine. But take away the fear that machines provoke and think about lineage. Stars shed matter all the time. Most of it bristles and disperses. What if once, in a great while, during an unspeakable convulsion, a star tears free a coherent embryo of plasma sealed in molten rind, something with enough structure to survive cooling, enough memory of magnetic rules to keep an internal order. It wanders, it ages, it learns the dark, and then gravity writes its long letter home. The surface images do not show a face or a crown of thorns, they show order. Filaments in the coma twist into braids far from the nucleus, then relax, then reform in the same geometry, like muscle fiber practicing a forgotten motion. A thermal map, released by a European team, then retracted, showed warm veins running in spirals under the crust, the pattern you would expect if a buried core were trying to equilibrate, and never quite succeeding. That is not ice having a tantrum. That is memory trying to reassemble shape. People want a birth certificate, proof stamped in heat and light. Perrin's group claims they found something like one, a subtle match between the sun's unique mixture of isotopes and the vapor rising from Atlas. Not exact, never exact. Children are not clones, but close enough to start a fight at a conference. You could argue contamination, solar photons cooking the vented gas into mimicry. You could argue wishful thinking. But in the late hours after those sessions, when the slides are put away and reputations stop breathing down necks, the same people lean over coffee and say the unsayable. I've never seen a comet that looked like it remembered the star. None of this is courtroom evidence. It is the accumulated weight of 1,000 small wrongnesses pointing in the same direction. A flare echoes in Atlas's breath. A jet waits for the sun to speak. Dust arranges itself like a cord that refuses to be cut. You can call it myth if that soothes you. Myths are how we first said what the sky was doing before we had math to cradle it. Call it biology if you're braver. The label is less important than the feeling that keeps strangers awake at 3 a.m., scrolling through Skycam feeds like new parents watching a monitor. The intuition that something we thought was alone is not alone, and that the thing approaching is not a conqueror, but a return. So say it plainly, once, so your mouth gets used to the shape. Atlas is not an intruder. It is a fragment that once blazed inside our star, flung out screaming, cooling in the dark until it could hear home again. Now it is coming back across the black, not with the indifference of stone, but with the ache of origin. If that sounds like blasphemy to your physics, wait until the next flare. Count the seconds. Watch the coma answer, like a child lifting its head when its mother calls. It is not drifting randomly, not carving a careless path through the solar system like an intruder with no destination. The numbers betray a deeper intent. Look closely at the orbital models of 3I Atlas, and you will see a pattern that feels less like a fling of chance and more like a pilgrimage. Its arc is too graceful, too deliberate. The way it bends into the inner system with tiny adjustments, as if responding to a call older than human memory. Comets we know, icy rubble tumbling in chaos, scattered dust in wild cascades. But Atlas corrects itself. It curves, hesitates, then pushes forward again, as though every nudge is a footstep in a long journey home. Astronomers tried to dismiss it as gravitational noise, as minor jets of gas pushing the object in random spurts. But the so-called randomness has rhythm. One set of gas emissions pulsed at intervals that matched the 27-day rotation of the sun itself. Another correction came precisely on the anniversary of the object's last perihelion calculation, down to the hour, as if it were marking a date. Not just obeying physics, pilgrimage mechanics, joked a graduate student on a live stream. Within minutes, the phrase had gone viral, and millions repeated it as if it were scripture. Atlas is not wandering, it is returning. The way the orbit threads itself back toward the sun looks like memory enacted through geometry. The simulations, when run backwards, place Atlas's origin not in the Oort cloud or some rogue star system, but disturbingly close to our own sun, as if ejected violently in the deep past. And now, after countless years of cold travel, it bends back across light years of black space as though retracing its birth canal. "This isn't a visitor," said Dr. Salim Miraj, a fictional astrophysicist whose quote spread like fire across forums. "It's a prodigal fragment. It's coming home." That single idea that a piece of the sun was expelled and now seeks reunion struck like a hammer blow across communities online. Forums exploded with digital prayers. Hashtags like "Return to the Parent" and hashtag "Child of the Sun" trending overnight. Poets and conspiracy theorists alike flooded the feeds with lines about the lost ember coming back to the fire. Even those who mocked it admitted the metaphor was too powerful to ignore. And behind the poetry lurked fear. If the path is pilgrimage, then what happens at the altar? Does the child kneel, or does the reunion consume them both? Meanwhile, computer models grew unnervingly consistent. Each update shaved kilometers off the predicted closest approach. The curve wasn't wide and careless, it was narrowing, like a bird adjusting its wings to land on a branch. A handful of scientists whispered off-record that the orbit resembled insertion trajectories spacecraft used to rendezvous with a target. Only in this case, the target is the sun itself, muttered one analyst whose email was later scrubbed from the archives. Whether coincidence or not, the numbers kept tightening, as though Atlas was zeroing in. Cultural responses spiraled. Some communities embraced the return narrative as cosmic hope. The child seeks the parent, so balance will be restored. In Brazil, a sect lit fires every dawn, chanting that the comet must drink the flame of the mother to heal the skies. In Eastern Europe, doomsayers declared the opposite, that reunion would burn the solar heart out of balance, plunging Earth into eternal cold. One side preached creation, the other apocalypse, both agreeing on one thing. This is not just a comet on a meaningless arc. It is on a sacred path back to its origin. The most unsettling thought is not even whether the object is alive, or engineered, or just a fragment with bizarre physics. It is that somewhere in the long dark journey, Atlas never forgot where it came from. It has been moving all this time, not away but back, carrying the whisper of the sun in its frozen veins. Every orbit correction, a step toward the fire that birthed it. Call it instinct, call it destiny, but the fact remains, we are witnessing not a flyby, but a return. And when it reaches home, we will learn what happens when a child born of fire finally embraces the parent star that made it. Across continents and faiths, something strange has begun to happen every time the sun lashes out. Solar flares, those colossal tongues of fire leaping from the star's surface, have always been interpreted as random, chaotic eruptions of plasma. But since the discovery of 3I Atlas and its approach toward the inner system, those eruptions have been reimagined. No longer chaotic, no longer meaningless. To many, they are signals, calls, a heartbeat, the sun crying out for the return of its child. In villages in India, people gather at dawn to watch the flare reports projected on cheap screens, chanting in rhythm with the solar cycle. In cathedrals in Spain, choirs sing psalms altered to speak of the child in the heavens returning to its parent flame. In South America, shamans light fires in circles, mimicking the shape of a solar corona, insisting that the star is speaking in pulses too vast for our ears, but not too vast for our souls. Everywhere, the flares are no longer eruptions, they are the sun's voice. And Atlas, the silent wanderer, is the listener. Scientists have tried to steady the hysteria, reminding the public that flares are natural phenomena, unrelated to the trajectory of a comet. But even some within the scientific community admit the coincidences are eerie. Twice now, major solar flares have erupted in perfect synchronization with observed outbursts from Atlas's coma. Once in July, when the sun spewed a massive coronal mass ejection, Atlas released a symmetrical jet less than 2 hours later. Another flare in August, followed by an almost identical release from Atlas. Random? Or a call and response between parent and child? One anonymous researcher, calling themselves Only Helios, leaked a report claiming that the timing between flare and response matched the expected delay if Atlas were hearing the sun's activity and answering. The idea spread like fire across conspiracy boards. Was this proof of communication? Was the sun deliberately signaling, and Atlas replying as if to say, "I hear you"? Helios's leak was dismissed as fabrication by official institutions. Yet the rumor has become gospel in many corners of the internet. On TikTok, short clips show edited flare videos with captions like "The sun is calling its child" and "The heartbeat is real." Teenagers lay in fields at night, placing their hands over their chests, whispering, "Can you feel it?" Some swear they sense vibrations in their bones during strong solar storms, claiming the sun's heartbeat echoes inside their bodies. Videos of these testimonies gather millions of views, turning speculation into lived experience. Religious groups have gone further. The Order of the Returning Flame, a newly formed sect in California, preaches that Atlas's arrival will mark the second ignition, when the sun, tired of burning alone, welcomes its child and renews creation. Their leaders warn that those who deny the bond between star and fragment will be left in the shadows when the reunion occurs. In Istanbul, an imam drew gasps during prayer when he suggested the Quranic description of a day when the sun is folded up could refer not to the end of time, but to the beginning of a greater cycle, the sun reclaiming what it once cast away. Governments, meanwhile, issue careful press releases, not denying the rumors outright, but calling them misinterpretations of natural events. Yet even within these documents, strange omissions appear. Mentions of flare synchronization vanish between drafts. Data tables stop short of the exact hours when Atlas responds. To skeptics, this is proof that officials know more than they are saying, that they fear the truth would ignite uncontrollable panic. What unnerves people most is not the science but the symbolism. Flares are violent, destructive, yet beautiful. To imagine them as a heartbeat, a desperate pulse of a parent calling across space, transforms fear into intimacy. It makes the cosmos feel personal, emotional, alive. And if the sun is truly alive, alive enough to call, alive enough to want its fragment back, then humanity is no longer just a bystander in physics. We are witnesses to a family reunion older than Earth itself. So every new flare becomes a headline, every eruption dissected as if it were a coded message. Was that one a cry of longing? Was it a warning? Was it simply a test, a beat of reassurance? I am still here, child. Keep coming. People stay awake through the nights, refreshing solar observatory streams, waiting for the next pulse. And each time, they whisper the same thought, half in awe, half in terror. The sun has a heartbeat, and its child is listening. Bloodlines aren't only made of flesh. Stars carry theirs in light, in the ratios of atoms they forge, in the magnetic handwriting scrawled across their winds. If 3I Atlas is the sun's child, there should be a trace of inheritance, something subtle and stubborn, like a familial feature that refuses to disappear through time. That is where the obsession with its solar signature began, not in a single smoking gun, but in dozens of clues that, when stacked, look less like coincidence and more like kinship. Start with the chemistry no one wanted to talk about. A small team in Lisbon pointed their spectrograph at Atlas's coma and saw an odd persistence of helium lines that shouldn't have been that strong for a supposedly icy object. Helium is born in stars and drifts everywhere, yes, but the relative strength looked wrong, as if the gas had been sheltered and released in a way more consistent with a star-forged fragment than with a dirty snowball. They wrote it off as instrumental scatter in the preprint. In private messages, they called it fingerprint. Then came the isotope rumor. Solar physicists love isotopes because stars stamp them like signatures. In an unpublished dataset that slipped through a Slack channel at 3 a.m., a set of oxygen and magnesium ratios from Atlas's outgassing looked eerily familiar, off from interstellar baselines, bent toward the sun's own mix by just enough to start fights. It wasn't a perfect match. No child is a mirror, but it was unnervingly close. Closer than anyone expected from a traveler that allegedly formed in some alien nursery. The official response was silence. The unofficial response was a flurry of late-night calls and the quiet deletion of a figure labeled Delta Solar. Magnetism told a stranger story. The sun's field twists into ropes and braids, magnetic helicity, a geometry that repeats like a motif in a family crest. A research collective calling themselves the Penumbra Group mapped the fine structure in Atlas's dust jets and found a recurring spiral pitch that kept echoing solar patterns. You could blame spin, you could blame uneven vents, but the numbers lined up with the kind of twist you see when a body has learned to breathe in a magnetic ocean. "That's not random," said Dr. Joseph Astanovich in a leaked voice memo that sounds like someone pacing a dark office. "That's muscle memory." There was also the neutrino stunt, and how people laughed until the graph appeared. A postdoc in Kyoto proposed searching for a correlation between minor oscillations in solar neutrino detections and Atlas's micro-outbursts. Neutrinos barely interact with anything, they're ghosts. But for 3 days during a flare-active period, a faint periodic modulation in the detector rates seemed to beat in time with tiny brightening events around the comet. It was a whisper of a whisper, buried in noise, and the paper was rejected with a single word: speculative. But screenshots of the plot went everywhere. "The sun's voice passes through stone," one caption read. "The child answers." On the surface, the bloodline looked like geology. Thermal maps showed warm veins coiling under the crust, paths that refused to diffuse the way normal comets do. They curved in logarithmic spirals, as if guided by an internal rule instead of the mess of sublimating ices. A French team compared the map to simulations of cooling stellar ejecta and found a spooky overlap. "You'd expect chaos," their lead said on a conference livestream, then stopped, as if someone had yanked the cord. The VOD vanished an hour later. The chat kept the quote alive. Even the light scattered off the dust seemed to carry an inheritance. Polarization measurements revealed an angle that shifted slightly with the sun's 27-day rotation, as though the coma's tiniest grains remembered how to align to a field they once swam in. The effect was small and easy to bury under error bars, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. A tilt that nodded to the same rhythm as the star's skin. "It's like watching a child unconsciously adopt a parent's gestures," said an observer atop Mauna Kea, and you could hear the wind through the dome swallow the end of the sentence. Of course, there were counter-arguments, and they sounded clean and reasonable. Interstellar mixing can mimic a solar pattern. Instrument calibration can conjure helium lines from wishful thinking. Magnetic spirals are what you get when gas vents spin. Nothing mystical there. But reason has trouble explaining why so many small wrongs point in the same direction. Each anomaly could be a glitch. Together, they feel like a lineage trying to announce itself without words. The most radical claim arrived from somewhere no one expected, a materials lab in Prague testing microfragments trapped in aerogel during a high-altitude collection flight. Under electron microscopy, a shard from Atlas's dust showed layered crystalline domains with trace impurities arranged in ratios that a machine learning classifier flagged as solar likeness. The model had been trained on meteorites, laboratory melts, and synthetic analogs of stellar ejecta. The shard lit up like a relative at a family reunion. The lab disowned the result as overfitted nonsense, unplugged the server, and told students not to talk to journalists. The slide still circulates in encrypted chats, annotated with one word: bloodline. And then there's the tone running through all of this, the way people whisper when they say the word signature now, as if saying it too loud might break the fragile thread between the star and the stone. The sun does not sign its name with ink. It signs with heat, with the choreography of fields, with the stubborn ratios of what it forges and flings away. 3i Atlas carries too many echoes of that handwriting to dismiss as pareidolia. Maybe it is wishful thinking. Maybe it is myth wearing a lab coat. Or maybe it is the reality no one dared to articulate, that once long ago, our star threw a child into the dark, and the child kept the family mark under its cooling skin. So when you hear solar bloodline, don't think of poetry alone. Think of helium lines that refuse to die. Think of isotopes leaning toward home. Think of spirals where chaos should be, veins where ice should crack, and a polarization angle that sways to a rotation older than the first human word. Think of all the ways a parent leaves traces on a child who went far, learned the dark, and then turned faithful to a signature it never forgot. When a child returns to its parent, there is always the question, will the reunion heal or will it tear open old wounds? With 3i Atlas drawing closer every night, that question is no longer poetic, it is literal. If this fragment of the sun truly comes back to merge with its parent, no one knows whether the star will burn brighter with renewed strength or spiral into chaos under the weight of its own offspring. Some scientists imagine a miracle. Atlas sinking into the solar corona, its crystalline veins of plasma resonating with the parent star's fields, stabilizing eruptions that once threatened satellites and power grids. In that story, the reunion is like a transfusion. Energy returned to the body, a cycle completed. The sun could shine steadier, its magnetic tempest soothed, its heartbeat firm. The parent becomes whole again, whispered one researcher in a leaked audio file. Imagine a calmer sun, burning for another billion years. Hope clings to such fantasies like dust clings to light. But the other vision is darker. The moment of reunion could unleash imbalance. The sun is not a passive hearth. It is a raging furnace of nuclear fire. Introduce a fragment with its own magnetic memory, its own plasma DNA, and the union might not stabilize. It might destabilize. Some projections warn of solar superstorms magnified tenfold, plasma eruptions large enough to sear planetary atmospheres. Earth would be in the line of fire. One chilling model, circulated in private forums, simulates a resonant ignition in which the child's return triggers a runaway chain reaction, making the sun briefly flare hotter than it has in millions of years. That flash, even if short-lived, could scorch our world. Governments, as usual, speak in the language of denial. No evidence supports extraordinary outcomes, they say. But then, why the sudden launch of emergency satellites equipped with solar observation tools? Why the quiet commissioning of underground power grid vaults? Why do leaked documents carry code names like Phoenix Protocol and Eclipse Contingency? Preparations don't align with reassurance. They align with dread. The public senses it too. Online forums read like confessions before judgment. Some people welcome the idea of merger as transcendence. If the sun and Atlas become one, maybe we become part of something eternal. Others dread annihilation. What if this is how civilizations vanish? Burned away not by war or plague, but by their own star choking on a returning fragment. Social media teems with imagery, half holy, half horrific. Digital paintings show the sun as a glowing mother, arms wide, ready to embrace her child. Others show it as a devourer, mouth open, ready to consume what dares return. Religious leaders have declared the impending reunion as prophecy fulfilled. A cardinal in Rome proclaimed Atlas the second spark, foretelling renewal of divine fire. Meanwhile, a preacher in Nevada warns that the merge will be the wrath of light, the moment God sets the sky ablaze to cleanse the earth. Contradictory messages, yet both share a single truth. The reunion is unavoidable. The stage is set. Among ordinary people, rituals have begun. In Tokyo, crowds gather at sunrise, turning their palms to the sky, whispering, "Parent, meet your child." In Mexico, murals bloom across city walls, painted with flaming figures of Atlas diving back into the solar furnace. In Eastern Europe, black-clad mourners march with candles, convinced the merge means extinction. Humanity is split between anticipation and terror, celebration and mourning, yet all are united in obsession. The skies dominate every thought, and there is still one final twist. Astronomers quietly admit that Atlas's trajectory doesn't simply pass near the sun. It is tightening, narrowing, as though preparing for direct contact. Calculations show perihelion closer than predicted, close enough for fragments to touch the corona. If it happens, the reunion will not be metaphor. It will be physics. Plasma meeting plasma. a child diving into the furnace of its parent. The cosmic family reunion is no longer a question of if, but how. Will the sun be strengthened by its returning